وكلمة الله هي العليا والله عزيز حكيم.
The Ascendant Quran, realigning man to the divine power culture. The first ever tafsir written directly in English by one of the best known Quran scholars in North America, Imam Muhammad Al-Asi. 3 volumes of this multi-volume tafsir are now available from Crescent International at a special price of $40 per volume, including shipping anywhere in North America.
The noble messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is revered and loved by all Muslims. But there is one aspect of his blessed life that is not well known. And that is the treaties he entered into, as well as the letters he wrote to kings and rulers of neighboring countries. For the first time, this book, Power Manifestations of the Seerah, examining the letters and treaties of the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, discusses this crucial topic in detail. The book is now available at a special price of $30, including shipping and handling anywhere in North America. Order from Crescent International, P.O. Box 747, Gormley, Ontario, L0H1G0. Or call us 905-887-8913. Order your copy today.
Welcome to Truth Jihad Radio. I'm Kevin Barrett. Recording this show 4 times a week and then doing a live show on Fridays. So you're getting a ton of radio here at Truth Jihad Radio. And if you want to go to truthjihad.com and contribute to making it happen, that would be great for only $4 a month. Actually, less than that. If you go right now, you'll find that it's actually $3.95 per month. You will be getting early access to all these shows, plus you can get free downloads. And not only that, you will feel good in your heart, and you'll be blessed with all kinds of barakah, which is Muslim speak for good karma. And I'm sure lots of good things will happen to you for only $3.95 a month. So once again, that's truthjihad.com. Look on the left-hand side. You'll see the place to click to sign up and become a member of truthjihad.com. And by the way, as a special bonus, you'll get to find out what's all this music I play. I play different bumper music pretty much every show, and it often has some kind of relationship with the show. So if you want to find out what the music is, you can join and go to the private section of my website, truthjihad.com, and you'll find out exactly what cool music I'm playing. All right, well, let's get going with today's show. Joshua Blakeney is a brilliant voice out of Canada. I actually brought him into the alternative media myself, I'm proud to say, back at the time that Splitting the Sky, Allah Yarhamhu, which is Muslim speak for rest in peace, was doing incredible things trying to arrest Bush for war crimes. I believe that was in Calgary. Joshua's never looked back. He's become Press TV's Canada correspondent. He's been doing all kinds of great stuff, and let's let him prove it. Welcome, Joshua. How are you?
Thanks, Kevin. It's great to be back on your show yet again. Yes, the first ever radio interview I gave was on No Lies Radio in March 2009, when Splitting the Sky, just prior to Splitting the Sky, going up to the police who had erected a line of impunity to shield George Bush from the law. Canada has a Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes Act, but they were abrogating and sort of defying the law to protect George Bush after he'd lost diplomatic immunity because Obama had come to power just prior to March 2009. And many Canadians were calling on the Canadian authorities to implement Canada's Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes Act. And when they didn't, Splitting the Sky, just after I got off the phone to you, after that first ever interview on radio I'd ever given, Splitting the Sky went up to the police and said, well, get out my way. I'd like to enforce the laws. We're not doing civil disobedience. We're not saying you've got unjust laws and we want to violate them. We actually are trying to enforce the law. And it seems that the lawlessness that he was drawing attention to has only compounded since 2009, unfortunately. And this latest questionable incident in Ottawa, the so-called Ottawa shooting, only vindicates the claims of people like Splitting the Sky and Professor Hall, who introduced me to Splitting the Sky. Professor Hall has probably put out the best article to date on the Ottawa incident at Veterans Today, entitled Harper, the Ottawa Shooter and Selling War. The Selling of War.
Isn't that a great headline?
Well, it is, yeah.
That's a gutsy headline.
Yeah, and it does seem to be connected because, usually these false flags occur and then we get sold a war or we get sold draconian legislation or both. What happened in Canada was they decided to go to war a couple of weeks before this perceived false flag, and they started to enact draconian legislation in the weeks leading up to, and actually on the day of one of the terrorist incidents, so-called terrorist incidents arose during that week leading up to the October 22nd.
Cart before the war horse, I guess.
Yeah, they kind of did it the other way around just to spice things up, I guess. But so things are getting pretty bad in Canada. Canada's government has decided to start dropping bombs upon the people of Iraq under the guise of a war against ISIS or ISIL, seemingly to advance the Odd-Ejionon plan. Obviously, Canada now is a kind of de facto colony of Israel. There's no politician I know of who's able to criticize Israel during the recent Gaza massacre. All the politicians from all the political parties, the Green Party, the NDP, the Liberal Party, and of course Canada's ruling neoconservatives, were unwilling to condemn Israel or to say anything other than Israel's sort of engaging in self-defense.
Wait. What about the Canadian Action Party?
Yeah, maybe the Canadian Action Party, I must say.
They're the only decent party in Canada, right?
Yeah, I suppose so, yeah. But, the mainstream parties in parliament, all of them presupposed the Israeli fable that they were sort of defending themselves. So you have the country with the fourth largest military on earth, pummeling people with sort of handmade rockets, impoverished Palestinians in a polity described by David Cameron, the current Prime Minister of England, of the United Kingdom, who's a supporter of Israel, as an open-air prison camp, that those people were blamed, the Palestinians were blamed, and the Israelis were portrayed as the victims. And, things are getting pretty bad here in Canada. One of the outgrowths of this perceived false flag has been the government proposing that they're going to criminalize people if they write statements online which are supportive of a terrorist organization, and considering any group which in any way opposes Israeli hegemony in the Middle East is labeled a terrorist organization by the Canadian government. It seems that now, they're going to be rounding up people merely for making political statements, for example, supporting the Lebanese National Resistance, Hezbollah, or Hamas, or nearly all the Palestinian factions. Like if you go to the Canadian government website, you can see the list of proscribed terrorist organizations.
Wow. You mean, so if I admit on the air that I like Hamas and Hezbollah, which I do, that means that they're going to kidnap me on some trumped-up charge here in the U.S. like they did to Zundel, and bundle me up like Zundel up to Canada and put me on trial, and then maybe ship me off to Israel. I mean, it seems like it's almost reaching that point.
Yeah.
And then there's the terrorist truther thing. Wasn't somebody in Canada floating the trial balloon of like terrorist truthers?
Yes, in recent years, Sun News has been incepted. The Sun News network has started doing TV productions before they sort of had newspapers. And, there's many pro-Zionist Jews presenting. Their most prominent presenter on their channel is Ezra Levant, who's very pro Stephen Harper's government. He's Jewish, he's a Zionist. And one of his colleagues, Brian Lilly, did a report standing in front of the Canadian Parliament after the so-called Ottawa shooting, and then started saying in passing, there'll be these kooks that say false flag terrorism, and they've never been to Parliament Hill. Well, Professor Hall, who I just mentioned, has been there hundreds of times, but anyway, they've never been to Parliament Hill, and they don't know what they're talking about. And when that was posted, the person who posted that on the Sun News website entitled that report "Terrorist Truthers." So it's almost, you could almost characterize this as the false flag to stop us talking about false flags, because it seems if you deviate from the official explanation of these terrorist incidents, that you perhaps can be therefore described by the state and characterized by the authorities as a condoner of terrorism. The law they're passing is going to be against glorifying or condoning terrorism. So we also are going to have hate speech laws refined and enhanced in this country.
Wait a minute, Joshua. Condoning terrorism, that means everybody who supports the official version of 9/11, 7/7 Mali, Madrid, and now Ottawa is essentially condoning terrorism, because they're looking the other way when it's completely obvious that insiders actually did these things. So that means that we have to start doing citizens arrests of everybody who believes the official story of any of these ridiculous hoaxes.
Well, I mean, now they're going to, of course, do the Orwellian opposite of that. They're going to say if you deviate from that official narrative, you're condoning Al-Qaeda or ISIS or whoever they're going to now blame for terrorist incidents. So I'm sure they'll do a false flag and blame Hezbollah at some point. So, yeah, I think, you could actually see 9/11 truthers becoming criminalized, not for engaging in violence, which, I wouldn't support 9/11 truthers engaging in violence. It would be fruitless. It would just give us all a bad name. But for merely making political statements, you're going to see skeptics criminalized. We already, of course, in Canada have a long tradition of throwing people in jail, criminalizing people for criticizing Jews. We have Orwellian hate speech laws, which say that if you think the pen is mightier than the sword, as I do and as you do, that if your political statements, if your utterances, if your writings are used by somebody else, not just by somebody else to engage in violence. So they could do a false flag and say, I read Joshua Blakeney's writings, that's why I did it. But merely if someone else hates a group. So if you espouse something which is likely to incite hatred against an identifiable group, the Canadian state can criminalize you, can give you a lifetime internet ban, a lifetime speech ban, and can throw you in jail for your utterances.
Well, they're going to have a hard time doing this to 9/11 truthers, though, because there are so many extremely respectable, highly accomplished people in Canada who are truthers. I mean, you, Professor Hall, there's Graham McQueen, Peter Dale Scott is Canadian. I guess he lives in Berkeley now. And in fact, there's a long list of professors in Canada. You have way more truther professors per capita than we do here in the U.S. I don't see how they're going to go to the universities and lock all these people up.
Well, I think there's definitely a Zionist faction that would like to see that don't support freedom of speech, that don't like criticism, that basically, there's a realization that the Canadian government, at the behest of Israel, is taking stances which are completely and totally indefensible. And the indefensibility of those stances is requiring them to pass laws to prevent people from drawing attention to the indefensibility of those stances. Obviously, in the United Nations, you see Canada often on its own voting against a Palestinian statehood recognition at the United Nations. Canada is isolating itself. I mean, Canada's government is throwing around these phrases like radicalization and extremism, and the rubric under which all these laws are being enacted is to counter so-called radicalization. But Canada's government is the embodiment of extremism. When you're at the United Nations and every single country on earth is endorsing a Palestinian statehood bid, and you're on your own on the extremity of that entity, you are by definition an extremist.
Wait a minute, Joshua, though. Doesn't this open a wonderful potential path to world peace? Canada sounds like it is the true home of genocidal Zionist extremist lunatics. Why don't we just move Israel to Canada? Why don't we give, quote unquote, the Jews, meaning all of the genocidal lunatics who want to go and live in some apartheid Jewish state, let's give them Canada, and they can run it, and Jews can be first-class citizens in Canada, and everybody else can be fourth-class. Hey, wait a minute, I think they already did that.
Yeah. Well, it does seem like we're living in a sort of apartheid state now where there's one set of rules for a certain group of people and another set of rules for others. The founding peoples of Canada were the British, the French, and the Aboriginals. The Aboriginals live as third-class citizens. People of European stocks now sort of live as second-class citizens, and you have this nouveau riche neocon Zionist faction who live as first-class citizens in this country. I would say we are sort of undergoing the Palestinianization of European peoples now, of non-Palestinians, of non-Arabs. One of the narratives you see quite frequently in the media is you'll see a picture of a white person, a white European person, and they'll say, this guy was responsible for running over the two soldiers, because prior to the Ottawa shooting a few days before, there was this other incident where they said somebody ran over two Canadian soldiers, and that was a French-Canadian white guy who conveniently converted to Islam and decided to run over a couple of squaddies.
Yeah, what's with this business of guys like converting to Islam and then the next day they go kill some Canadian soldier? Like, what are the odds? I mean, yeah, I can see, some crazy person goes and, kills somebody or whatever, but it's like, what's this have them convert to Islam right before they do it? There's something very fishy about this.
Well, of course. It's just this ongoing attempt to prevent any resistance to Israel, and the main block of resistance to Israel is, of course, the Ummah, is the Islamic world, and so they always have to include an Islamic element to these narratives. But, of course, now they're also realizing that more and more ordinary white guys, just basically who have computers and a few brain cells of figuring out what's going on.
So why doesn't anybody convert to Islam and go, kill Dick Cheney or Donald Rumsfeld or Paul Wolfowitz or George W. Bush? I mean, I'm not urging that, but I'm just saying that it would make a lot more sense than having these mind-controlled zombies pretending to convert to Islam and then the next day just, bumping off some poor soldier who has nothing to do with anything. How could there be, there's obviously no real terrorism. If anybody was really angry and wanted to strike out, they wouldn't just run over some random soldier. They would go after the people who were responsible for the war crimes. And then though I'm not urging that, I'm not saying that I would be going into mourning if that happened either.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is one of the hallmarks of false flag terrorism, right? I mean, like people do
kill innocent people.
Yeah. And then, of course, they always die too, right? I could spend the whole show going into the details of this, the fact that the guy who allegedly...
Well, let's go over some of the details because, I haven't talked about Ottawa since, a couple days after the fact. I talked to Denis Rancourt, and Denis Rancourt was actually... he was thinking it was not a false flag or leaning away from it being a false flag when I talked to him. So let's go over the strongest evidence that this was a false flag.
Yeah, so, I drew people's attention to the article by Professor Hall. He draws attention to one interesting fact, which is that the alleged shooter, his mother is a top bureaucrat, apparently, in the Harper government. Like, she apparently is head of the immigration department. So, it kind of reminds me of the Ted Olson, Barbara Olson thing, that if you're going to if someone's going to have to come on TV and presuppose the event, you might as well have someone who's a member of the regime, so to speak. So that's an interesting fact, that the alleged shooter's mother is apparently a top official in the Harper government. That's
wow,
really
shades of Hinckley.
Yeah, it's all a bit incestuous, isn't it? And so then, the question again, we get just shown this photograph of this guy with something that kind of looks like a gun. It sort of also doesn't look like a gun. I know Professor Fetz is quite good at identifying weapons and how tenable it was or wasn't that weapon was used in these incidents. So we get this photo. Apparently, some people say it emerged from the United States. It seems often Reuters gazettes these stories. We had another shooting in Canada, and it seems that it was the shooter's image emerged from them. But other people say that ISIS's Twitter account was the...
You can't make this stuff up.
Yeah, I mean, there are quite a lot of people saying that it was ISIS's Twitter account that first disseminated the photograph of the shooter. So, who took that photograph?
Well, that means it was Rita Katz, because Rita Katz is the Mossad operative who probably handles ISIS's Twitter account.
Yeah, I mean, you could just imagine these Israelis sitting in Tel Aviv cackling and rubbing their hands and laughing at the stupid goys who, I mean, all these laws we're enacting, I'm pretty sure they're written in Tel Aviv. These narratives that are spun through the Zionist-owned and operated media, they're probably concocted in some psychological warfare department in Tel Aviv. I mean, they just must be laughing at all of us at how stupid, members of the establishment who are getting used to parrot all this nonsense are. So there was also...
I want to sign up for ISIS's Twitter feed. So everywhere I go, I can get beheading pictures on my cell phone.
Yeah. And then who's helping them with their social media? Like you said, you just said one name. I mean, it's just so outlandish. I mean, I think it's wisest just to emphasize the context of this. I mean, there are the details. There was a drill, apparently the Canadian authorities were running some kind of drill, which envisaged two incidents, one arising in Quebec, namely the running over of Canadian soldiers that later transpired, and one other city, something arising in another city. So extremely
They were doing a drill about running over soldiers?
Pardon?
You said they were doing a drill that envisioned running over soldiers?
No, but I'm just suggesting that, a quote-unquote terrorist incident that would arise within Quebec, and a few days later, an alleged terrorist incident arose, namely the running over of soldiers. So, that's extremely dubious. I mean, I think that the thing that makes this so obviously a false flag for me is not just the fact that the official explanation is extremely untenable and questionable, is the context. Canada's government has decided to go to war. In 2003, Canada's government didn't go to war against the people of Iraq. And Stephen Harper, Canada's current prime minister, who's far more loyal to Israel than he is to Canada, said he was ashamed to be a Canadian when Canada didn't go to war against Iraq in 2003. And so now Canada is bombing Iraq. Moreover, they're enacting all these extremely Orwellian laws. Like he actually, on the day, I actually pulled some quotes from a Globe and Mail article here. If you don't mind, I'll just read them. This was published on October 31st in the Globe and Mail, entitled "How Canada's Terror Laws Could Change." It says, tabled Monday, the Protection of Canada from Terrorists Act boosts the powers of Canada's domestic spy agency, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS, to share information and operate internationally. It also gives new powers for CSIS to keep its sources anonymous. So one thing you often see is like they're going to want to go to court and say, well, someone told us that this person is a terrorist threat, or the Mossad, our good friends in the Israeli Mossad said that this person is an agent of Iran or whatever.
Rita Katz gave us a picture of this person cutting off a head.
Exactly. Go to ISIS Twitter account if you want the source. And then, so then I'll just continue this article. The bill had been meant to be tabled Wednesday, the same day Michael Zehav Bibo shot and killed a soldier at the National War Memorial before storming the Centre Block building on Parliament Hill where he died. And then it continues. Bill C-44 may not be the end of it. The federal government continues to eye what new powers it will seek for police. Government ministers have mused openly about lowering how much evidence is needed to place a terror suspect under a peace bond.
Evidence? We don't need no sticking evidence.
Yeah, which allows officials to closely monitor the suspect even if they don't have enough evidence to lay a charge. Great. So now they don't need evidence. So they can just go. I mean, this is the thing. The people who investigate these so-called terrorism incidents are the people who benefit, right? Like the police and CSIS, they're all going to get all these great powers. And yet it's the very authorities who benefit from these incidents who are investigating it. I mean, it's almost like, I got an email yesterday from someone inviting me to a conference in London, the Centre for International Law or something. And I was thinking, we really need to kind of encourage the development of jurisprudence vis-a-vis false flag terrorism, right? I mean, the idea that...
to say the least, like maybe prosecute at least one of these cases somewhere, someday.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was really one of the main premises when international law was developed was the idea that, you get conflicts of interest. You've had that a lot. Professor Hall, who's my mentor, is focused on with relation to Aboriginal peoples, how many used to go over to London and talk to like the Crown and the Parliament in England and said, well, there's a conflict of interest having the beneficiaries of colonization trying us in their kind of white courts. It's the same principle as false flag terrorism, that when we have these events domestically, the idea that it's the state that benefits from that, that's going to investigate them, we need some supranational body to go to. And, if the International Criminal Court or something had laws which acknowledge the reality that there is this long history, this verifiable history of wars beginning with false flag incidents, with governments attacking their own people and blaming their enemies and so on. Now the state can say, well, we don't have evidence, but this person's a terrorist, and you don't want to get accused of condoning terrorism, so you better shut up and let us arrest him, right? So I'll just continue reading this because I think it's quite revealing. It also shows how sort of uncritical the mainstream media is. So government ministers have openly mused about lowering how much evidence is needed to place a terror suspect under a peace bond, which allows officials to closely monitor the suspect, even if they don't have enough evidence to lay a charge. Other charges could include making it illegal to write online statements that support a terror group, and expanding powers for preventative arrest or arrest without charge. Great.
Wow. So anybody who writes anything online that supports the Palestinians' right and indeed duty to resist occupation by all means, including military means, the very things that Hamas and, of course, Hezbollah does in Lebanon, anybody who even just points that out, who simply just states what the international law situation actually is a terrorist.
Well, yeah, or what if the UN brings out a report like the Goldstone report, and Amnesty International have done reports too, where they've referred to Israel terrorizing the Palestinians? Are Canada's officials going to be arrested for condoning terrorism when objective reports are written which accuse Israel of terrorizing Palestinians? I don't think so. So I have one last segment here from this article entitled "How Canada's Terror Laws Could Change" in the Globe and Mail. On the same day as Mr. Couta Rouleau's attack, the House passed Bill C-13. The government refers to it as an anti-cyberbullying bill. but it goes well beyond that. The bill contains new police powers, including several new warrants for surveillance, tracking and gathering of bank information that critics have said will, in some cases, require little evidence to get. The issue was raised again this week when the RCMP commissioner called for certain evidentiary thresholds to be lowered. And another thing they've put into that anti-bullying law, which I think people in the States should probably watch out for in their different jurisdictions, is if you bully someone based on their nationality, which is very similar to these hate speech laws. So some Israeli could go crying to the authorities saying, oh, they called me and my family, terrorist killers of Palestinians. I feel bullied and victimized. Can you arrest this person and throw away the key, right? So basically we're, part of the colonization of Canada, the turning of Canada into a vassal state of the Israeli empire, is that our speech is going to be curtailed because the Canadian state is taking such indefensible positions vis-a-vis our colonial master, Israel. And so we have hate speech laws which make it illegal to criticize Jews, to draw attention to Jewish power. Luckily for the Zionists, Canada's Supreme Court is about just under 50% Jewish Zionists, and they're recognized as the kind of pro-censorship faction in the Supreme Court. So they recently upheld hate speech legislation, and the authorities in Canada have suggested they're going to strengthen the hate speech laws in this country as a result of this shooting, which really shows all these liberals who say, oh, it's all about preventing hatred towards minority groups. It's nonsense. It's about preventing us criticizing those in power in this country. So you can't criticize Jews or you go to jail. And now under these new laws against glorifying terrorism, you can't make statements which are supportive of those who are resisting Jewish hegemony in the Middle East. So basically, there's going to be this attempt to basically prevent any discussion of Israel, of Jewish power, of Zionists, unless it's supportive of those forces, in which case you can opine. But if you are critical of Jews, critical of Zionism, supportive of those resisting Zionism in the Middle East, there's a good chance you'll find yourself being flung in jail. And Canada already has a long history of this. Ern Zundel and others, people who've made online comments and have been given, speech bans and thrown in jail and so on. So that seems it's going to be compounded now.
It sounds like Canada is becoming even more Israeli occupied territory than the U.S. is. And I suppose, you guys can be proud of that because you're leading the way. I know Canada sometimes has had a sort of a national inferiority complex, thinking that they kind of follow the U.S. and pop music trends and all these totally meaningless things. But now, when there's a war on against ISIS, which is actually a war against the enemies of ISIS, that is Bashar al-Assad, the Canadian false flaggers are way ahead of the American ones. These elections here in the U.S. were driven largely by fear of ISIS. And, Gallup did a poll showing that Americans are now in a paroxysm of fear of terrorism and giving votes to Republicans who they think are stronger and tougher against those mean old terrorists than at any time since George Bush suddenly got 90% popularity ratings after 9/11. And it looks like Canada is ahead of us in that it's the false flag up in Ottawa that has really brought home this notion that there's a threat to ordinary North Americans coming from this made in USA, made in Tel Aviv ISIS phony terror group. So I guess you guys should be proud up north of the border. You're taking the lead. You're even more Israeli occupied than we are.
Well, I had been saying in recent years that the only good thing about having a government that's so subservient to Israel is that you don't need to have any false flag attacks, because false flag attacks are done to neutralize any resistance to Zionist policies, and there was no resistance in this country to Zionist policies, and therefore that was my explanation for why we hadn't had any false flags. Although we do have this we've had many of so-called foiled terror plots in recent years where the police come on the TV and say, the latest one was Al-Qaeda in Iran was going to derail a train.
Wait a minute, Al-Qaeda in Iran?
Yeah, amazing.
Where were they going to derail the train? In Iran?
No, Al-Qaeda, like a group called Al-Qaeda in Iran was going to come to Canada and derail a train, we were told. I went on Press TV and I said, it's just obvious that some Zionists added in Iran, to that. They were going to do just Al-Qaeda was going to, and then some Zionists in the Canadian establishment said, I'll just put Al-Qaeda in Iran and we'll...
Do we have a franchise in Iran yet? We better start one.
Yeah. Well, this is just, it is, in a way, it is risible and laughable. But, it's serious. I think just as the Jewish Bolsheviks sought to colonize Russia and take over Russia, because it's such a resource-rich, fecund country. I think colonizing Canada is kind of an obvious thing to do if you're globally hegemonic. Canada has the third largest oil reserves in the world, the second largest diamond reserves, the second largest uranium reserves in the world, which help the nuclear industry, which Israel's involved with Dimona and so on. So it's kind of an obvious country to try and control. Moreover, I was just recently in Japan, actually, and, Japan, it's still a relatively sane country because Japan doesn't have a military. So they haven't really been bombarded with this anti-Islamic propaganda for years and years like we have. And with Canada, there's nothing in our constitution that says we can't militarize to the teeth. So, why not turn Canada into this attack dog? I also think it gives the Zionists another option in North America, because as you've drawn attention to, there is a little bit of resistance among the realists in the US. And so if push comes to shove, they could just turn Canada into their outpost of Zionist aggression emanating from North America. So,
well, heck, I think they should all emigrate to Canada, and maybe Canada could offer them the northern couple of counties in the Yukon as their promised land, and they could club baby seals instead of Palestinians and live happily ever after.
Yeah, well, it's certainly an interesting idea. It's very sad, like Canada, it was a once loved country. It could be a utopia, as I just suggested. We have all the resources, all the water, all the food that we need. We could just be an independent country. But the sad fact is that Canada has this history of having its laws and its policies delegated to it. It used to be from London, which I think the policies that came from Britain in hindsight were slightly better than those which are coming from Tel Aviv today. You could say in the Cold War, Canada kind of morphed into being a colony of the United States, and now it's a colony of Israel. And we've been colonized by the Zionists. The resources that are being despoiled, and many indigenous peoples are being displaced. Many of those corporations are owned by Jews. Barrick Gold, the largest gold mining company in the world, is based in Toronto and is owned by Peter Munk, who's a Hungarian Jew. And they have this Munk School of Global Affairs at the University of Toronto, which holds events which are so-called, ostensibly promoting democracy in Iran. And one thing they're also doing is promoting this idea of eco-terrorism. So many indigenous peoples are doing blockades of De Beers and Barrick Gold, at their mines. And are resisting, therefore, Jewish power in a sense, because those corporations are Zionist corporations. And so now an offshoot of this anti-terrorism discourse is the creation of a category of Canadians called eco-terrorists. So Canada has the third largest oil reserves in the world, but our oil is embedded largely in tar sands, so it's not just coming out the ground as like liquid. It's has to be washed away from sand, and they only had the technology to do this in the last sort of 30 or 40 years, and it's highly environmentally destructive. And so many indigenous peoples are complaining about this. And so now they're going to be characterized as eco-terrorists if they do blockades and protests against this. So Canada's radically changing. It's the jewel in the Zionist crown because we have all these resources. We have such a compliant government. You can bring in immigrants from the third world and put them in military fatigues and give them weapons, and they'll go and fight Zionist wars for you. So it's a sorry state in this country. It could have gone in a different direction. Canada could have been a utopia, but unfortunately these people came in and took over our government, took over our media, colonized our country, and now we're doing what our Israeli colonial master wants us to do. A characteristic of a conquered people is that you can't say no, and we can't say no to Israel. In fact, if you say anything critical of Jews, anything supportive now of the Islamic resistance in the Middle East, you're probably going to get put behind bars for saying that. So it's a pretty
interesting. I largely agree with what you're saying, Joshua, but I just read a terrific new book by Paul Hellyer. It's called The Money Mafia. Paul Hellyer founded the Canadian Action Party. He nearly became a Canadian Prime Minister in the late 60s. He was Minister of Defense throughout the 60s when Canada consolidated its different armed services branches. And so he's a real insider, but he's an honest insider. And so he progressively became more marginal as Canada became more and more taken over by the money power, the New World Order banksters. And in his book, The Money Mafia, Paul Hellyer is very forceful and straightforward in criticizing the New World Order money mafia, the banksters. He also talks about 9/11, and he comes out as a big Judy Wood fan, actually a friend of hers. And he also talks about global warming, interestingly enough. And finally, he goes on record as the first G8 cabinet level person ever to categorically state that UFOs are as real as the planes that fly over your head, and that there's a big-time ET presence on Earth, and that is largely responsible for the creation of these draconian national security states. So it's an interesting book, but he never really goes there with talking about Jewish power or Zionism. And the book he really hammers on most of the most important issues other than that. Do you know anything about Paul Hellyer, and what's your take on his approach?
Yeah, I've been told a little bit about him. Maybe the cynic in me would say, oh, he's talking about UFOs to distract everyone who's skeptical from Zionist power.
just like who was it? David Icke, when he went to Vancouver, had this huge Jewish protest because they said, well, if he's talking about flesh-eating, blood-sucking lizards, what he really must mean is Jews.
Well, it's like in France where they say Dieudonné says the Quenelle is against the establishment. So all these Jews are persecuting Dieudonné. So does that mean they identify with the French establishment?
Yeah, but so, I think Hellyer is quite serious, right? Just like when David Icke talks about, blood-sucking, flesh-eating lizards from outer space, he's really referring to blood-sucking, flesh-eating lizards from outer space, not Jews. And likewise, Paul Hellyer, I think, is very serious about the ET issue. And frankly, Joshua, I don't know if you've looked into this. I'm even afraid to tell you to, because, I know that when you started listening to me, you started investigating all these issues and getting yourself in trouble by telling the truth about them. And this one is another of those issues where the truth seems to be almost stranger than fiction, in that, to me, it's just blindingly obvious that something really weird is going on with the whole, the so-called UFO cover-up and so on. There's, either the world's most outlandish, heavily funded disinformation operation trying to make it look like there's something going on with ETs, or there is something going on with ETs. And I'd say 10 to 1, it's the latter.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm open-minded to all these things, and once you go down the rabbit hole, you do find yourself saying, I'm not going to dismiss anything until I've looked into it myself. I personally have begun to take an interest in historical revisionism, and I recently went to Japan, and I went to the archives at the National Library in Tokyo, and I've pulled out 28 publications, basically Japanese government informational materials from the war, or not even government, but basically Japan had their version of Press TV during the war, in which they provided their version of events. And so I'm at the moment trying to republish them in my spare time, and I'm kind of working on that stuff, trying to contribute to the historical revisionist movement in my own way. I took Japanese at university, and I can speak a bit of Japanese, and so I thought I could contribute in that way. So anyway, I'm kind of working on that. And then these false flags happen, and you get yourself, am I distracted, or am I getting, am I doing good work? I don't know. But anyway, I've been having to stop and drop that stuff which I'm working on, and look into what exactly has transpired in the last couple of weeks in this country. I've got other things I'm working on, so I don't really have time to look into the UFO stuff. And so I'm working on other projects, but I'll definitely try and take a look at that when I get a moment.
Yeah, I was. I've kind of followed it half seriously for decades, but then when I was doing my PhD minor on folklore, and in particular, I was studying stories of astounding personal experiences, miracle stories from Morocco, both today and 1,000 years ago. That's when I had to look into the whole issue of these legends of amazing, astounding, paranormal events and experiences. And once you start looking into those, you see that among the wild and crazy stories that people tell and believe to be true here in North America, the ones about, alleged ET experiences and UFOs are among the most interesting. And a whole lot of them are confirmed with radar. Like you have huge numbers of pilots who've had these incredible discs just fly right alongside and then just take off at light speed practically, doing things that nothing physical that we know of could possibly do. And on and on and on. I mean, it's, once you look in this, you realize, wow, there's really something weird going on here. There was a period in the early 50s when the media was actually open about it, and it looked like they were heading for some kind of disclosure. And then the lid got clamped down tightly. So honestly, there's something worth looking into. But as far as trying to figure out the larger picture and what's really going on, I don't know if that's something that we really can hope for in our lifetimes. The layers of deception and imagination. And plus, people, when they tell stories, especially this kind of story, there are tendencies to exaggerate, to imagine, to blur the lines between inner experience and outer experience. Jung made his whole approach to UFOs based on that notion. So I don't know if it can ever give us clear political lessons for how to behave and, where the power really is, the way some of these people think it can. There are always going to be debates between the various interpretations of the data, which is so all over the place and so out there, literally and figuratively. So I don't know if the UFO issue is really going to help us that much, but Paul Hellyer thinks so. And he's one among these people like Judy Wood who think that there is suppressed free energy technology and that the one thing that could help humanity the most would be revealing that technology and getting us off of fossil fuels and using clean energy. And honestly, I didn't take this seriously until I read Nick Cook's book, which is, what's that one called? The Hunt for Zero Point. And, he was the former editor at Jane's Defense, a very serious person and researcher and journalist. And he makes a good case that it sure does look like there's some kind of suppressed anti-gravity and or free energy technology that's been around for many, many decades. And, if there is, and it's being suppressed, it's a very strange kind of question. Why would they do this? Why would they suppress that? You would think they could make a lot of money off it, but if you think a couple minutes longer, as Hellyer does, he says, of course they couldn't make that much money off it. Once everybody's got their own little power station in their own house, then who's going to sell anything to them? So anyway, it's an interesting area, and I've come to the conclusion that there is something worth investigating in both the free energy and the ET UFO issues.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You were saying your house operates self-sufficiently. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, but I'm not operating off of Tesla technology. I'm operating
come on.
off of...
Tell us the truth, Kevin.
Yeah. I go out there with my Tesla suit, and I plug my axe into a tree, and this amazing energy comes out of the wood from the tree when it's burned in my wood stove.
Okay,
and it keeps me warm in the winter.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think Paul Hellyer, obviously, he is sort of symbolic of the old kind of Canadian politician. Professor Hall, I immigrated to Canada and befriended Professor Hall, and he just told me so many stories about, what Canada was like when he was growing up. And it was a nice country, and he could get on CBC as a young intellectual. There was access to the mainstream media for people who were, independent thinkers. It was a better country, but in the past couple of decades, especially with the inception of the neoconservative movement, it seems that Britain, the United States, Canada, all these countries have been taken over by this hostile elite group. I mentioned having recently been in Japan, and one thing I observe in Japan is first thing you notice there is everything is high quality. Everybody looks healthy. They don't have any of this GM garbage. I recently got off wheat. I've been getting into this wheat belly stuff, and I saw a report saying Japan to resume importing US wheat after a 2-year ban because they found 1 grain of GM wheat in the wheat they were importing.
But wait a minute, aren't we seeing headlines about how Japan is polluted with Fukushima radiation, and you're saying everybody is in glowing health, as it were?
Well, yeah, I mean that there is the Fukushima stuff, but even there, like if that had happened in North America, I think it would be way more covered up because people are actually aware that there is this risk. Like you go to apartment blocks and there's signs saying the radiation level in your area is X, Y, and Z. We're scraping away topsoil. So if it was some kind of false flag, obviously that isn't being broadcasted on the media, but there is just way less of a lie machine there. But what I was going to say was, I think one thing you notice in Japan today and definitely historically is there's this idea of shame among the elite. People,
they still have shame. Their leaders still have shame. What a concept.
Yeah, whereas we're ruled by people who have an ideal of chutzpah, shamelessness, right? And so in Japan, if you produce a low quality car, a low quality product, even with Fukushima, the CEO of TEPCO came on TV and was bowing and almost crying and apologizing to the nation.
Practically committed Harry Carey live on camera.
Yeah, so there is still this undertone, this idea of shame, and that if you let down your fellow citizen, my computer just went on dark. If you let down your fellow citizen, that you've sort of lost face, and we don't have that in our society because we're ruled by the opposite. Yeah, we're ruled by this hostile elite group that if they make all our children obese, if they make low quality products, that is defeating the enemy, defeating the other, because we're ruled by a group that has a strong in-group, out-group tie, and the more they undermine and sabotage the other, the better they're doing.
But wait a minute, aren't you exaggerating the ethnic component of this? Because, if you look at the Fortune 500 and all the biggest decision makers in all these areas, there are a few where you would have Jewish Zionists preponderant, such as Hollywood. And then you would have some where you'd have Jewish Zionists, maybe about half the people in the power group, which would include probably banking and finance, journalism as a whole. And then in others, they would be way less than half. The military-industrial complex, I bet the key people in the military-industrial complex are probably no more than maybe 25% Jewish, which is wild overrepresentation since Jews are less than 2% of the population. But that's still 75% Goys. So I'm not sure that it's, and plus these Jews, they're tribal when it comes to Israel, but they're not really, they're not religious anymore, really. They're not. A lot of them are just basically kind of secular, ordinary North American greedheads who've lost religion, lost ethics, lost morality, just out to do well in this world, looking for power and money, just like everybody else, only more so. So, I mean, maybe it sounds like, if you're saying that it's all a big hostile in-group, out-group thing based on, ethnically Jewish rule in North America, I would say that would be an exaggeration. Sure, they may be leading the way. They may be the cutting edge of the larger problem. But the larger problem, I don't think, is any, particular ethnic group.
Yeah, but I think it's more about what the dominant ideas are in a society, and the dominant ideas in North America are vetted to ensure that they are compatible with Jewish power, and that it's the spirit of a nation, right? That's
but when they're feeding us crap, when they're putting toxic chemicals in the food, for example, that's not like Jewish people putting it in the food to feed to the goys and then they're eating good stuff themselves, is it?
Well, I can't say I know that, but I think it's basically the dispensation we live under produces a certain mentality among all the ruling classes, among all the capitalists, among all the politicians. And I think that has been heavily influenced especially by the kind of identity politics that Gilad Atzmon draws attention to. Of course, Gilad is often a critic of those secular Jews you referred to, and he's identified, the secularization of Judaic values. So even though such people may have rejected the Jewish religion, they still have held on to many of the values inherent to Judaism. So when you look at the history of the Frankfurt School that Dr. Kevin MacDonald has drawn attention to, there has been a certain cultural subversion which exists in a country like Japan, but in a much more watered down way. And so, you notice there that basically Japanese are ruled by their own kind, and that does have its pros and cons. And one of the benefits, it seems, is that there's high quality products there, and there's an attempt to do good education and produce good food and produce good houses and good cars and so on. I think that the spirit of a nation does have a big impact on this, and the spirit of America is one where there is this kind of rat race mentality, and the cultural subversion that we see emanating from Hollywood, and we know who owns Hollywood, does change the mentality of those who get in power.
Right, but the greedhead hucksters came from everywhere. Here in North America, there were so many resources. Anybody who really wanted to plunder, was willing to keep slaves or trade slaves, was willing to steal land from the Indians, maybe kill Indians, was willing to swindle his fellow people that he would never see again on a Mississippi riverboat. I'm referring to Melville's story, The Confidence Man. Such people would prosper no matter where they came from. So I don't think it's just Jews. In fact, I think this North American spirit, especially the U.S. American spirit of can-do capitalism, get rich quick, plunder and move on, mine the soil here, mine the metals there, and then wreck the place and throw the tailings into the river, poison everybody, and then move on. I mean, that spirit is a kind of a psychopathic, greedy, materialistic spirit. And it comes from certain people, I think, from every culture. The more psychopathic people probably from every culture who really were greedy would come to the Americas to try and get rich. And sure, that's probably true for Jews as well as everybody else. But I think it's an exaggeration to suggest that Jews have all that much more to do with it than anybody else.
Yeah, and there is an analysis of the Puritans as having been kind of wannabe Jews too, right? Trying to create a new Jerusalem, a city on the hill. They had a sort of chosenness that may have impacted U.S. ideology too.
And talk about greed. I mean, the Puritans, they thought that if they piled up a big enough pile of gold, that meant they were chosen to go to heaven. And so they're some of the world's worst greedheads.
But the thing is, the phenomena that I just identified in the U.S. context are also being globalized now and are manifesting themselves in countries like France and Britain, which did at one point have a kind of noblesse oblige type mentality among the ruling classes. So you see in a country like England now, the McDonald's culture, the dumbing down of society and so on is taking place. So it seems that there has been an explicit agenda to foist this upon respective countries. That doesn't mean that they haven't, the people implementing this cultural subversion haven't sought to identify pre-existing elements to collaborate with within the different countries. But I think that there is a lot of evidence that this is a sort of top-down thing emerging from a particular group to ensure their group evolutionary strategy is successful and the group evolutionary strategies of competitor groups are undermined. But yeah, of course, in the US, there were pre-existing negative forces which also need to be condemned and identified. But yeah, so I do think though a lot, I used to really be into like Marxism and communism, but once you sort of look at the roots of that, it sort of becomes indefensible. But I'm getting to the stage now where I say basically having a hierarchical society is inevitable, but whether or not the elite is benevolent is what it boils down to.
Here. I agree completely. This is where I think the Islamic model of leadership has something to be said for it, particularly the Shia model, where in Islam we are more interested in the quality of the leadership than necessarily in the process. I mean, democracy is great, but democracy is just the process. And it's good or bad to the extent that it produces good or bad leaders. The result you get is you end up with a bunch of leaders, and whatever the process is. And so the real issue is to try and get those good leaders. And frankly, I'm not that impressed by democracy anymore. I'm not sure that the good leaders are rising to the top under democracy any more than they were rising to the top under noblesse oblige or what have you. So yeah, I agree with that. I think that this issue of the nobility taking responsibility for the well-being of the community, which was part of the whole feudal system, that's been going on for a long time. Of course, Marx was observing that. If you read the novels of Jane Austen and others, they talk about this happening 200 plus years ago. The world has been getting dumbed down. It's been getting greedier. It's been becoming less classy, as it were. It's, more psychopathic, more this world, less interested in these values that transcend this world. And I think that actually, rather than being part of some group's evolutionary strategy, I think it's mostly a kind of a process, an Oswald Spengler style process of civilizations rising and, in this case, falling. The termite mountains in Africa that can grow to 20 feet tall, they follow a certain schedule. They go up and they go up and they go up. And when they hit whatever, 20 feet or something, then they're going to start coming down. And pretty soon they just fall apart and rot. And it just always happens. And the termites can blame each other or whatever. But that's just how it goes. And, Spengler kind of saw that with so-called civilizations. And I kind of think we're just seeing the inevitable decline phase of so-called Western civilization, and the loss of the sacred, the loss of the religion that it was founded on, primarily Christianity, I think is a huge part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a critic of that deterministic viewpoint could say, well, why when I go to Japan is everything how it was when my parents told me about England when they were growing up, and then when I go to Japan today, I see a lot of the phenomena that they told me about.
They're a different civilization with a different trajectory. They may not be falling.
Yeah. So, but I mean, the idea it's all predetermined. I mean, obviously, the Frankfurt School, there was a lot of effort put in by a certain group to expedite the downfall of the West and of Western civilization. I think so we could be colonized in the way Canada's colonized. But I agree with your remarks on democracy. I mean, this is one of the propaganda memes we keep seeing coming from, for example, the Harper government in Canada. They say Israel is a democracy. It has elections. That's why we should be siding with Israel. But it overlooks the fact of the major question of, there's the question of how did leaders get to power? The next question is, what do they do when they get to power? So by saying Israel is a democracy and then its leaders go and mass murder Palestinians and conjure up plots for the whole world, and basically the leaders in Israel seem to be sort of competing over how many Palestinians they'll be willing to slaughter, and the Israelis vote for that, well, that just makes Israel worse, because it means that they're having a referendum on this and the Israelis are endorsing this. So when people say Israel's a democracy, that's why we should support the Israeli people or the Israeli system or the Israeli government. Well, that for me, that just makes Israel look worse, because it means that if Israel, say, had a leadership like the Saudi Arabia has, and then Israel was slaughtering people, but the people of Israel could say, well, look, we live under this absolute monarchy, we don't have any say in this, then perhaps Israelis would be more easily exonerated. But
well, yeah, of course, Saudi Arabia is probably just as bad an argument for absolute monarchy as Israel is for democracy.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a complex thing. And, I think all these systems have their benefits, socialism, democracy, social democracy, communism, national socialism. Like, they probably all have their pros and cons. And I think the best way to approach the ideal system is to be syncretic and synthetic and attempt to cherry pick the best ideas from all the systems that have been offered. I think one reason that the Ummah, that Islam is being targeted, and specifically Iran, is that the Islamic world still has a kind of organic unity. It still has the patriarchal family, and many of the things that have been destroyed among Western European peoples still exist. And I think what Iran has done since 1979 is they have developed and refined an actually viable group evolutionary strategy, at least for the people who live within the polity called Iran today, but also for other peoples who they want to bring on board, like the people of Lebanon and Palestinian people maybe too. And that's one reason why Iran really has to be targeted. So in a way, the Islamic world is better off in some ways. I mean, yes, here in North America, we're not being directly, showered with white phosphorus gas like the Palestinians are. But culturally, we've completely lost our spirit. We've been completely destabilized. All our culture, as I say, is sort of vetted to be compatible with Jewish power. So people from other traditions don't have their own culture anymore. People are malnourished. People's families are completely destabilized. You can get a divorce more easily than you can get car insurance these days. And that has an impact on our society. So I think there's a lot that we can learn from the Muslim world. And I'm definitely on side with Mark Glenn's proposal that we should try to foster a Muslim-Christian alliance, a white Arab alliance against our shared oppressor.
Well, sounds good to me, although I'm not sure about, the Arab is not a race. Arab is just anybody who speaks native Arabic, which includes everybody from white, blonde, blue-eyed Berbers in Morocco to very dark-skinned people in Sudan. They all speak Arabic. They're all equally Arabs. And as for white race, we'll have to have a white race conversation some other time, because we've reached the end of the hour. Well, thank you so much, Joshua Blakeney. I appreciate your outspoken erudition And I hope you can keep Canada free, at least free enough to tolerate people like you roaming around outside of the walls. Keep up the great work. Talk again.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
وكلمة الله هي العليا والله عزيز حكيم.
The Ascendant Quran, realigning man to the divine power culture. The first ever tafsir written directly in English by one of the best known Quran scholars in North America, Imam Muhammad Al-Asi. 3 volumes of this multi-volume tafsir are now available from Crescent International at a special price of $40 per volume, including shipping anywhere in North America.
The noble messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is revered and loved by all Muslims, but there is one aspect of his blessed life that is not well known. And that is the treaties he entered into, as well as the letters he wrote to kings and rulers of neighboring countries. For the first time, this book, Power Manifestations of the Seerah, examining the letters and treaties of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, discusses this crucial topic in detail. The book is now available at a special price of $30, including shipping and handling anywhere in North America. Order from Crescent International, P.O. Box 747, Gormley, Ontario, L0H1G0. Or call us 905-887-8913. Order your copy today.